Here you go, old-timer. 2,000 yards. Knock yourself out.
The kid was still laughing when he held out the rifle. Here you go, old-timer. 2,000 yards. Knock yourself out. A 200-pound Navy SEAL, sleeves rolled, ball cap backward, grinning at his buddies like he'd just landed the best joke of the morning. The old man took the rifle without a word. He set his cane down in the gravel, lowered himself behind the scope the way other men ease into a favourite chair, and looked downrange exactly once. 2,000 yards out, a steel plate no bigger than a dinner tray wobbled in the heat shimmer. Not one operator on that line believed the old man could even see it. 60 seconds later, every single one of them would remember this as the morning they stopped laughing for good. If you've ever been written off for how you looked, type steady in the comments before. This story is done, because what the old man did next, and the reason he came at all, was something none of them saw coming. He had arrived a little after 6 that morning, before the marine layer burned off the high desert, walking in across the gravel apron from a dust-coloured sedan parked at the far edge of the lot. He moved slow, leaning on a cane worn smooth at the grip, and he stopped once to look up at the range flag snapping stiff against a hard quartering wind out of the northwest. He read that flag the way a farmer reads a sky, then kept walking. He wore a frayed ball cap with no insignia, a windbreaker 2 sizes too big, and boots that had been good boots a long time ago. Nobody met him. Nobody was expecting anything that looked like him. The new long-range training complex was all fresh concrete and chain link, and the men gathering on the firing line were the kind of young the body only stays for a few short years. Lean, loud, certain. They were waiting on a sniper instructor, a name on a schedule, a man they assumed would show up in a contractor's polo with a hard case in each hand. They watched the old man shuffle toward the line and decided without a single word passing between them that he was lost. Raymond Coyle did not look like much, and he had stopped minding that a very long time ago. At 79, he carried himself the way men do when they have nothing left to prove and have known for decades. He had spent the drive up listening to the radio and not much else, his spotting log riding shotgun on the seat beside him, a battered green notebook held together with a rubber band. He had come a long way to stand on this particular line, on this particular week, for a reason he had not told anyone at the schoolhouse. He intended to keep it that way, as long as he could. So when the young operators turned to look at him, the slow once-over, the smirk, the elbow into a buddy's ribs, Raymond just nodded, the way you nod at weather, and found a quiet spot near the ammunition table to set down and wait. The one who started it was a broad-shouldered kid they called Brick, though the name stitched on his range bag read Bar RNNA. He had the easy arrogance of a man who had never once been the slowest in the room. "Sir," he said, drawing the word out long. "You lost parking for visitors is back around the front. This is a live range." A couple of the others laughed. Raymond looked at him and said, mildly, that he was right where he meant to be. Brennan grinned wider. "Yeah? You here for the tour? Someone said the senior centre must have let one out early. Someone else said, 'Don't be a jerk,' but he was smiling when he said it." The wind kept tearing at the flag overhead, and the old man kept watching it, and the kids kept circling like the wind didn't matter, because to them it never had. It went on like that for the better part of an hour. They ran their morning drills and shot their groups, and between strings they kept finding new ways to tell the old man he didn't belong. It was never cruelty, exactly. It was the carelessness of people who have only ever been the strong ones, who have never had to imagine being on the other side of the joke. Brennan was the loudest of them, but he wasn't mean. Underneath it, he was just 28 and undefeated, and he didn't know yet that the world keeps a longer memory than that. When the rifle on the bench jammed and the range went cold for a stretch, he got bored, and bored young men reach for entertainment. He picked up one of the long guns, a bolt rifle chambered in .408, the kind built specifically to reach out past a mile, and carried it over to where the old man sat. "Tell you what," Brennan announced, loud enough for everyone. "Big Steel's hung at 2,000. Nobody's even rung it cold this week. You want to take a crack, old-timer? Show us how they did it back in your day." He held the rifle out flat across both palms like an offering, and the line went quiet and grinning, waiting for the show. Raymond looked at the rifle for a moment. Then he looked at Brennan. And then, without any hurry at all, he stood up, set his cane against the bench, and took it. The grin started to fade on a few faces right then, though none of them could have said why. There was something in the way the old man's hands closed around the rifle. No fumbling, no searching for the controls, fingers finding the bolt and the safety and the comb like they were finding their way home in the dark. He didn't shoulder it standing up to show off. He looked at the bench, at the bags, at the angle, and he eased down behind the gun, settling his body into the ground an inch at a time, the way a man does when his bones cost him something, but his discipline costs him nothing. He pulled the stock into the pocket of his shoulder, dropped his cheek to the comb, and went still. Not nervous still, not careful still. The kind of still that only comes from 10,000 repetitions and a war. "He's gonna miss the whole berm," somebody muttered, but it came out softer than the man meant it to. Raymond didn't dial much. He glanced once at the flag, once at the mirage boiling off the desert floor between him and the plate, once at the dust kicking off a ridge to the right. He moved the elevation, then a touch of wind, his lips moving slightly, doing math nobody could hear. He pressed his thumb to the bolt and let it down soft. 2,000 yards downrange, a little tray of steel sat in the haze, a target most of these men treated as a long-shot lottery ticket on their best day. The old man breathed out slow and even, and let his fingers settle on the trigger like he had all the time that had ever been made. The shot broke clean. The big rifle rolled back into him, and he rode it without flinching, already back on the glass before the rest of them had finished blinking. For a second, there was nothing, just the crack rolling out across the flats and the wind and the held breath of 9 young men who had been laughing. 90 seconds earlier, then the steel rang. It came back to them across 2,000 yards of open desert, thin and clear and impossible. That flat, bell-bright clang of a cold first round finding plate. Nobody moved, nobody said a word. Brennan's grin was gone like it had never existed. The old man worked the bolt once, the empty brass tinking onto the concrete, and he laid the rifle down gently and reached for his cane, like a man who had simply finished a chore. That was when the door of the schoolhouse opened behind them, and a voice, none of them ever ignored, cut across the line, "On your feet." Command Master Chief Vargas came down off the steps at a fast walk, and the operators were standing before they'd decided to. Vargas was 30 years in, a man who had buried more friends than these kids had birthdays, and he walked straight past every one of them to the old man at the bench and put out his hand. "Gunny," he said, and there was something in his voice the young men had never once heard him use. "It's an honor. We weren't sure you'd make the drive." Raymond shook the hand and said the drive was fine, the coffee was bad, same as ever. Vargas almost smiled. Then he turned around to face the line, and his face was not smiling at all. "Gentlemen," he said, "meet your instructor for the week." You could have heard a primer drop. Vargas let it sit, let them feel the floor tilt under them, and then he told them who the old man was, because he knew the old man never would. Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Coyle, United States Marine Corps, retired. A scout sniper with the 1st of March Division in the hills southwest of Da Nang, 2 tours, 1968 and 1969, back when the whole craft these kids had built their careers on was being figured out one hard lesson at a time, with a Winchester bolt gun and an 8-power inertial scope and no computer to do your thinking for you. Vargas told them that the doctrine in their own training manuals, the way they were taught to read mirage, to call wind off vegetation to hold for a target that would never hold still, traced back through men exactly like the one standing in front of them, the men who paid for that knowledge in country. And then he told them about the shot. How in the spring of '69, with a borrowed M2 Browning and a scope bolted to the receiver, this man had reached out and made a hit at a distance these operators had been raised to think of as legend, a record that stood untouched for the better part of 40 years. Brennan stared at the old man like the ground had opened up. "I handed him the rifle as a joke," he said, barely above a whisper. Vargas looked at him. "I know," he said. "Now you know what you handed it to." But that wasn't the part the old man had driven all that way for, and it wasn't the part the title of this story could ever tell you. Vargas had one more thing to say, and his voice changed when he said it. He told them that in May of 1969, on a ridge that didn't even have a name, the gunny's spotter had been hit, a young Marine, a lance corporal, the best set of eyes in the company, and that Raymond Coyle had carried that boy on his back for the better part of 6 miles, through elephant grass and monsoon mud. Taking 2 rounds in his own leg before he made the wire, he carried him the whole way. And it had not been enough. The lance corporal died that night, and the gunny had been walking with a cane on bad days ever since. Vargas paused. "His name," he said, "was Sam Brennan. If you understand what it cost to carry a brother home, comment Semper Fi right now, because of every man on that line there was exactly one whose blood ran cold at that name." Brennan didn't move. The big undefeated kid who had been the loudest voice on the range an hour before stood there with his mouth slightly open and the colour gone out of his face. "My grandfather," he said. "It wasn't a question." Everybody on that line had grown up with a folded flag in a triangle case, somewhere in the house, and a name that got said in low voices on certain days of the year. But Tyler Brennan had grown up with one and never known the face of the man who brought his grandfather home. There had only ever been a story. The gunny, the one who tried. The old man turned and looked at him for a long, quiet moment, and something passed over his face that wasn't surprise at all. "I saw your name on the roster 3 weeks ago," Raymond said. His voice was low and even, and meant only for the kid, though the whole line heard every word in the dead silence. "Brennan. I did the arithmetic. Figured you for Sam's grandson." He reached into the chest pocket of that too big windbreaker, slow, and took out something on a length of black cord and held it out in his open palm. A single dog tag, worn thin and soft at the edges from 56 years of a man's thumb. The stamped letters had nearly gone smooth, but you could still read them. Brennan Samuel R. The old man had carried it every day since the night he failed to save the boy it belonged to. "I told myself if I ever met one of his," he said, "I'd hand it back to the family in person. So I drove up to teach this class." The shooting was just to get your attention. Tyler Brennan took the tag in both hands like it was made of something that could shatter, and the toughest man on that range turned away from the others so they wouldn't see his face come apart. Raymond put a hand on the kid's shoulder, not hard. "Your granddad called the best wind I ever saw," he said quietly. "Smarter than me by a mile. He used to say the rifle's just a tool. The man behind it is the weapon." He looked out at the flag still tearing at the wind 2,000 yards downrange. He'd have been proud you made it here. He'd have hated how you treated an old man on a range. He let that land soft, the way only a man who had earned the right could. So don't do it again, not to anybody. You never know who you're handing the rifle to. The week that followed was unlike any those operators had ever trained. The old man could no longer kneel without help, and couldn't see past 400 yards without his glass, but he taught them things no computer ever would. How the desert lies to you in the last hour of light, how to feel a switch in the wind on the back of your neck before the flags ever showed it. How patience was a weapon, and how the quietest man in any room was usually the one you should never underestimate. They hung on every word. Brennan didn't leave his side. By Thursday, the kid who'd handed him the rifle as a joke was carrying his gear and writing in a green notebook of his own. When Raymond finally let him take the long shot, the 2,000-yard plate, it was Tyler reading the wind and Tyler's hand on the bolt, and the old man spotting beside him, The steel rang on the third round, and the boy wept openly and didn't care who saw, and not one man on that line said a single word about it, because by then they understood. On the last morning, the old man crossed the gravel apron the same way he'd come, slow leaning on the cane, worn smooth at the grip, dust on a pair of boots that had been good boots a long time ago. But this time the line did not laugh, and the line was not bored. 9 Navy SEALs stood in a row at the edge of the lot, and as Raymond Coyle passed, they came to attention and held it, and Command Master Chief Vargas rendered a slow salute that the old Marine returned with a hand that did not shake at all. He stopped once at the same spot he'd stopped on the first morning, and looked up at the range flag still snapping stiff against the same hard wind that had been blowing the whole time. The wind that had been there before any of these young men were born, and would be there long after. The wind that the loud and the certain never learn to read until somebody quiet teaches them how. Then he got in the dust-coloured sedan and drove away. Tyler Brennan stood watching the road long after the car was gone, his grandfather's dog tag warm in his fist. Here's the thing nobody on that range will ever forget, and the thing worth carrying out of this story yourself. The men who have done the most are almost never the ones telling you about it. They're the ones at the edge of the lot you walked right past. They're the worn cap, the borrowed windbreaker, the cane in the gravel. Respect was never something you give a man for how he looks on his best day. It's something you give every man because you cannot possibly know what he carried on his worst. If this old Marine story moved something in you, if you believe the quiet ones who carried us this far have earned a place at the front of the line, then subscribe and stand with this channel, because somewhere out there is another old man crossing another parking lot right now, leaning on a cane, reading a wind nobody else can feel, waiting for somebody to be decent enough to find out who he really is. Hold steady. We'll keep telling their stories as long as you keep listening.